Okay, I'm going to get started now. I have 11 a.m. and I'm going to get started. So, good morning, everybody, or at least in New York City, it's the morning. Thank you for joining. My name is Liz DeVito. I'm your host today, and you are here to learn about our research on communications and change management consulting. So, usual, let's start with some housekeeping. I'm hoping that you can all see the screen right now, and what you should see is like the title page of a PowerPoint presentation that says Driving Business Outcomes with Change Management. The phone lines are muted, but I also you can submit questions in the chat box. If we don't get to them today in this call, I will respond to you separately after the call. Um, I will leave Q&A until the end, but you can submit questions in the meantime. So also this webinar is being recorded, and within 24 hours, I would say that means Monday, it will be available on our website, and the slides will be available to download as well. So don't worry about the slides. If you want them, they will be available. So let's get started. Uh, Let me go to the first slide here. Okay, so this is me. I am Liz DeVito. I am with ALM Consulting Intelligence, been here about 7 years now. I focus on the market for people and organization consulting, and that's where we put communications and change management in our taxonomy. So I've been doing this for about 7 years. I have a great passion for this market, and I'm really excited to be talking to you about the research today. So what I'm going to do is there's basically like two sections, two halves of this presentation. The first part, I'm going to talk about the market context. Where is, and I'm just going to say change management consulting, by which I mean communications and change management. So where is change management consulting today? And then the second part is going to be all about the ALM Vanguard research. But I wanted to set that context in the beginning because it's very important in terms of understanding the ALM Vanguard analysis. So that is the general plan today. So first, we'll begin with the market context. So as I said, I've been with ALM for about 7 years now. In fact, change management was the first report I ever did at ALM. And it's interesting, in the 7 years that I've been doing it, we haven't done it every single year. You'll see a timeline on the bottom there where we started doing it annually in 2018, but the first look was 2012, then 2016. Now, I know that change management has a much longer history than these 7 years, but in my 7 years, there's been a tremendous amount of change in this consulting market. And basically, you can see it in this illustration here. On the left, you see where it was in 2012 when I started. And that was an interesting year because that happened to be the year that the Association of Change Management Professionals was formed. Very much, Booz Allen Hamilton had a lot to do with it. They have a whole curriculum down at Georgetown University. But it was the beginning of change management professionals saying, we really need to professionalize this discipline in much the same way that project managers did with project management. So 2012 is a pivotal year for change management consulting. But the consulting approach, which very often had to do with what the client demand was what I'm calling stacked. So, change management at that time, was still very much an add-on project. What I heard when I spoke to consulting firms back then was that they were still very much in the position of needing to convince clients or the client stakeholders that you need to do change management if you're going to succeed at transformation or any kind of change, whether it's a technology change. You need to address the people aspect of change. But at that time, as I said, it was really an add-on. It was something they thought of, usually clients thought of, after everything else had been done. So that's where it was. Now, something else that's interesting, if you look at the timeline on the bottom, is that the following year was when Harvard Business Review published an article about disruption in consulting. And I just want to point out that that followed very closely to the first report that we did on change management. Then, all right, so change management today and what we're going to talk about and you're going to hear about is very different. It's very integrated with transformation consulting. Um, it's much more aligned to corporate strategies. In fact, a lot of consulting teams will have a change management consultant on the team from the very beginning of an engagement project. Sometimes even during the bid process, if the client, the RFP says, we also want to know how you're going to manage the change. Because that's another characteristic of today's marketplace, which is that on the buy side, meaning clients and the executives out there running organizations, they get it now. They understand the importance of change management. And a lot of organizations have even developed a change management office in their company. They may have hired a director of change management. They may have a network of change management. But anyway, what I'm getting at here is that it's much more sophisticated. People get it. It's a continuous process now. It's not something you think of doing after you've made the change. And also it's very measured now. There's a data analytics has a lot to do with where change management consulting is today. So this just in a nutshell is what we've seen in our research in the last 7 years. Now, simultaneously, there's been an evolution of consulting business models. And this is what that article that Clayton Christensen wrote about in 2013. We've addressed it in separate webinars about the state of the consulting industry. But basically, what has driven the change in consulting business models is the same as for the rest of the business community. It's disruption, it's digital, it's technology, it's the the power of the consumer, the shifting demographics. Millennials wanting a different experience, including consulting millennials. So whereas consulting before, the business model was very much around, or was organized around industry, function, and geography. That was the matrix for organizing a consulting firm. But in the last few years, there's been a shift in consulting models to something that's more fluid, but the focus now is to have a model that can deliver outcomes. Clients want outcomes. They don't want a deck sitting on their desk at the end of the project. And what this means is that there's been a change in the type of talent that consulting firms are hiring. There's more productization, more managed services, and all of these factors of these new consulting business models play very strongly into change management consulting. And that's why I wanted to point this out, because I will say that of all the markets that I cover, change management is where I see these new models really becoming everyday consulting approaches, and we're going to talk about that as we continue. But so it's very important for you to know that this evolution of consulting business models is what is enabling new approaches to consulting service delivery. So let's get on to the key findings from the ALM Vanguard research on change management. So all of our Vanguard research opens up with a discussion of what were the trends that we saw and how were the Vanguard leaders in our research, how were they building their capabilities to respond to market demand. So this year, and remember this year, it's only been 1 year since I did the report as opposed to 5 or 6. But there was a lot of change, which is interesting to me, a lot of it driven by innovation. But these 4 categories, or capabilities, I should say, were the things that kept bubbling up to the surface in terms of how consulting providers were modernizing their approach to change management consulting, how they were, interacting with clients. We're going to talk about each one of these over the next few slides, but just to start, it's all about making change more transparent, personalizing and scaling change, very, very important, something that's enabled by digital technologies. Enhancing service delivery, have some important messages out here for consulting firms of all sizes, and then engaging the ecosystem. So we're going to go through these 4 areas, and I have examples for each one as well, and then we'll get to the actual Vanguard map. So let's start. So in terms of making change transparent, what was very interesting this year, what I noticed was, well, first of all, I should say that a lot of the innovation and what consulting firms focused on in the last year in terms of refining their change management consulting offering was they were focused on the how. How do you make change happen? How do you activate it? There's been so many years and so much research that shows that CEOs are disheartened by, they're spending a lot of money on change management. They're not getting the return on the investment. They're not getting the adoption that they want. And consulting firms have, well, they've always taken this to heart. But whereas in 2018, when I did the report, they were very focused on helping clients develop the business case, their buyers. Why do you need to do change? Why do you want a culture of innovation? If so, this is how you do change. But then in the last year, it was like, okay, now we're going to leverage all of our resources and help our clients actually activate change. And one of the first things that became apparent in my research was making change transparent. Some of you it may sound familiar, but there's always been kind of change was bifurcated. There were like two phases. There was planning for change and then activating change. And the planning phase was very often in a black box. The people who were actually responsible for activating didn't really know what went on in the planning stage. And so, consulting firms said we need to open this up because there's so much that the people who are responsible for executing and activating change can learn from the planning process. And also, remember I talked about how change consulting now is focused on making change a continuous process. And so that continuous process is feeding back into the planning phase as well. So things are not happening at a certain point in time. There's always an initial starting point when the client says, yeah, we need to make this happen. But then usually the process that they are adopting is continuous. And that means opening up the planning phase, engaging more stakeholders from planning through execution. And what I mean by that is that this is part of the whole new approach to consulting with these new business models. Consulting firms are working with more of the client's employees than ever before. There used to be this, the team. There still is an engagement team on the client side working with the consultant. But when it comes to the designing and implementing phase of the consulting process, consultants find themselves working with more people at the client organization. And so that has been critical in terms of making change more transparent. The example I have here is Deloitte. And I should say that I've only got one example for each of these capability drivers. In the report, if you were to read through all of the profiles, there are many examples of this that firms are doing to make change transparent. But I thought this example from Deloitte, they have this framework called Transformation Defined. And this is a framework where, the client comes to them and says, we want to migrate to the cloud. And so with this framework, they will help the client think through, okay, are we trying to improve organizational agility, ability? What is it you're trying to do here for the organization? How does this change? Is it going to help the organization? And then they map, what will need to be done to get that done. I am really oversimplifying this, but that's what they're doing. But the other thing about this tool is that they plot other change engagements, projects, I should say, whoever the provider is. They plot all of the change projects on this one matrix so that the individual who has come to them sees their request in the context of everything else that their organization is doing at the enterprise level. So it sounds obvious, it sounds easy, it's not, but it's really quite powerful. They've had a lot of success with it, and it's really helped to open up that black box. So that's making change transparent. Next, personalizing and scaling change. This is, as I said earlier, enabled by digital technologies and digital transformation. But this is also something that clients are asking for because they need to, they are installing their own business models, new social business models, where they have teams collaborating across virtual networks, across geographies, with people outside of their organization. They need to be able to reach all of those people when they are executing a change activity or program. And digital technology has enabled this. Uh, and this is also where a lot of the data capture comes in, where all that data captured for voice of the employee research, which it feeds that continuous improvement loop, is captured in this part, by scaling it and personalizing it using digital technology. And so, and it's about even McKinsey, when that's the example I have here, McKinsey Implementation and Impact Essentials. They've been doing a lot of work on the mass personalization of change. And so they're really advancing in this area, but it's they also have this whole implementation business and a playbook for what they call impact essentials, which is about making change happen in the context of executing transformation. So large scale, enterprise wide change. And they're able to work with the client very closely throughout. You probably have heard that strategy to execution. This is very much about that, but beyond execution, it goes to scaling. So their McKinsey implementation business, they have teams of people who are expert in McKinsey methodologies and frameworks, but also project management, and they will work with the client and they don't leave the client until the client is able to actually build an internal capability for managing that change and executing it and then sustaining it. So basically what McKinsey is doing, there are some other firms doing this, they're creating for the client an operating system that enables them to manage and execute change and continuously refine it. They also offer training and education. They have the McKinsey Academy, the Aberkin Institute, which is it's not called the Institute, just Aberkin, which has some really, really exciting training modules for leaders, developing change leaders, using like wilderness experience methodologies. It's really interesting. So they have this whole package of services and solutions and that they can use to help the client personalize and scale change. And as I said, there are other firms doing this, but this one is probably the most sophisticated at this point. So enhancing service delivery, calling out this capability, I did this for a couple of reasons. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, with the whole evolution of consulting business models, consultants are interacting with their clients differently. And I have never seen it more clearly than with change management. Basically, what consulting firms are doing is they're changing the experience, the engagement experience that the client has working with them. So it's an experience-driven approach to consulting. And that experience, it models the capabilities that the client needs to develop, whether it's using, an agile approach to teaming or to designing new solutions. It's very interesting, and like I said, I have never seen it come to life more so than with change management. And when I spoke to clients, they're absolutely thrilled about this, being part of this experience. Because not only because of the actual experience, because it's very creative and design driven, but also there's a lot of knowledge transfer going on, which they can then use to transfer to their people. EY has a really great end-to-end service offering for the change experience that includes, once again, there's technology, consulting, data science, managed services. They bring it all together in this service offering for their clients. But there is an important message that I want to tell, because I know that a lot of people on this call are with smaller consulting firms, or maybe you're self-employed as a consultant or with a middle-sized consulting firm, something I heard from clients is that they still get frustrated when their consulting provider is not completely aware of the level of service that they need. So, for example, the consulting provider may have been working with them in a project manager role when what they really want is a trusted advisor. And and the other thing I'll tell you is that this complaint was lobbied against the large firms, and not the smaller firms. But I think smaller firms, especially those who are growing, should be aware of this because it's very important. And when I thought about it, and I talked to the clients about it, I asked why. I thought to myself, why is this? And I think it's because change management does have this history and legacy of being an add-on, of being project-oriented, being linear, being a self-contained discipline, as opposed to a truly, a capability, a consulting capability, a management consulting capability. And when it becomes, a management consulting capability where you're helping the client build an organizational capability for change, then they're looking even from their providers like they want it all, but they want a trusted advisor. They don't want the provider to come for a couple of meetings and say, all right, let's talk about your plan, here's the strategy, here's the design, and then they send a team of junior consultants. That model is, first of all, it is, never been a popular model because clients don't like to buy, pay for their consultants to train their junior staff. But also, it just it doesn't work because the junior people or the people who are more tactical don't really have that strategic context. But I did want to call this out because I heard it a lot when I spoke to clients during this project. So let's go on to the last capability, engaging the ecosystem. And once again, now, you probably all, as students of consulting and practitioners of consulting, have been reading a lot about how consulting firms are building ecosystems. I remember, a few years ago, what I heard from clients in consulting firms was that, the consulting firm would say, okay, we're going to help our client navigate the maze of providers out there. So but it was still incumbent upon the client to cobble together the contract with the tech provider and then the consulting provider and then the managed services and then the outsourcing and to do all of that. But now consulting firms are building these ecosystems and they take that on behalf of the client. So the ecosystem, there's a service orientation to it. There's also very much, it's really more about innovation. It's about, they know that they can't be all things to all people. So even though they may be a global firm that, with, end-to-end services across the whole spectrum of management consulting, they still can't be everything in this world of tech startups and unicorns and crowdsourcing. So they're, developing these ecosystems. Now, with this, once again, change management, this is the first research project I've had where I've seen these ecosystems really coming to fruition and adding value to what the consulting provider delivers to the client. So the example I have here is Boston Consulting Group. Part of their whole refresh of their approach to change management consulting are these impact centers. And these impact centers are part of a much larger, framework and methodology. But basically, what it is that BCG, a couple of years ago, they acquired a boutique consultancy called Maya Design. And Maya Design was specialized in the connection between space and human behavior. And so they had this whole, practice for what they call creative environments, helping their clients design a physical environment that changes behaviors. And so BCG acquired this boutique in 2017, and they used it to build what they call these impact centers, which is a physical space. And as part of when BCG says, okay, we're going to help you implement this change, strategy that we've helped you design. And part of our implementation recommendation is that you have an impact center. Now, this is much more than a project management office or a change management office, although there are elements of those in an impact center. And the thing is that these impact centers, they have a very specific structure. They are also, it's where meetings happen in person or virtual. There are mandates of, when the meeting happens in the impact center, things must be decided, next steps, milestones, next steps. It really creates this physical space where there becomes this sensibility that the leaders, the people who are managing change at the client, are more committed to making it happen. They show up for meetings. Everybody's accountable. Everybody's responsible. So I just thought it was a very interesting use of the ecosystem. Once again, the clients love it. The physical space can be set up at the client site. Sometimes clients will come to a BCG Innovation Center, but it's just a very interesting use of physical space for activating change. So, okay, I'm looking at the clock here. Let's move on to the Vanguard map itself and the results of this year's analysis. I just wanted to quickly go over, this is our methodology. So when we evaluate the consulting firms that we profile in our research, we score them on a number of depth criteria and breadth criteria, which you can see here on this slide. So, this is how we score them on a scale of 0 to 4, 0 being they don't provide it, 4 being they're very strong. And this is how they end up in either the leaders section, challengers, or contenders. So let's move right on to the Vanguard map for 2019 for change management consulting. So I covered 29 firms this year, which is about 5 more than last year. And there were a lot of shifting positions. You still have a core group that is in the Vanguard leader upper right section there, although there were some movements within that section. But the thing is, and this is where you see these big firms having a huge advantage, is that innovation is driving so much of the service offering, the new development and services, and the value proposition. And these firms just have the money for it. They've got a ton of money for it. So, but they're doing it smartly and wisely. So let me not mitigate that. But the other thing that's interesting that this map shows, you will see a company there called Daggerwing Group. They are a strategic change consultancy that is part of Omnicom Group. And they are an example of how creative design is playing a much more critical role in change management. I even heard from clients that they're earmarking parts of their budget for creative services. You have some firms, especially these, Vanguard leaders like, PwC, Deloitte, and everything, they have acquired creative design agencies, and some of them are making really excellent use of them in how they deliver change management. But again, clients are earmarking money for companies like Daggerwing. You'll see another company down there in the contenders called Profit, sort of on the left. They also have creative and digital design capabilities. They're staking a claim in this space. So just know that those creative services are playing a more critical role. The other thing I think that, that this year's analysis shows is that change management is simply essential to consulting value propositions. In years past, when I would reach out to firms and say, oh, I see you have a change management methodology, can I cover you in my research? They were like, well, we don't really think so. Yes, we have it, but it's project driven, or it's specific to the fields that we consult in, whether it's technology consulting or supply chain consulting. But the thing is that even those firms have really developed their ability and capabilities around change management consulting, because, as I said earlier, executives realize that change management is absolutely essential to succeeding at transformation. So everybody's doing it, to put it lightly. The other thing that this shows is that let's see. Yeah, a lot of the differentiation in the market is coming through innovation. It's change management is very much aligned with transformation in general, and it also is increasingly data driven. Some of the factors that moved some firms up in the vanguard were that they launched digital change platforms in the last couple of years that matured in the last year. But that is an area where there's a lot of innovation going on, and consulting firms are delivering all kinds of services and capabilities on those digital change platforms, from data analytics to experience journeys, that employees can access and do on individually. So they're really pretty impressive, these change platforms. And there's more innovation going on now with some of those firms in the challengers field. And so I expect next year that this is going to look different again. And once again, it will be driven by innovation. And I see that our time is up. So I'm sorry we didn't get to questions, but please, if you have questions, send them in, and I will be sure to answer you. And once again, thank you very much for attending.